Today we're joined by Jane Ebinger, the Director of Policy at Sustainable Energy for All, also more commonly referred to as SE for All. Prior to SE for All, Jane was a Chief Climate Change Specialist working on policy and finance at the World Bank. Before that, she worked in the oil and gas industry for BP and BHP Billiton. Thanks for joining us, Jane.
Thank you, William.
So there's a lot of discussion when it comes to energy access, universal energy access around finance, around policy, but capacity, human capacity, seems to me to be an often overlooked or at least underappreciated element of achieving Sustainable Development Goal 7, SDG 7. So from the SE for All perspective, what are the most critical skill sets or workforce needs for achieving energy access? And how do you see the capacity gaps with regard to the countries where we have the biggest opportunity to make a difference in energy access, to actually transform that opportunity into reality?
So, maybe just before talking about the skills and capacity, one of the things we could, just reflect on is the scale of the challenge, particularly in the context of sub-Saharan Africa. And when we think globally about the access challenge, the latest data shows us that we have about 1 billion people who lack access to electricity and over 3 billion that lack access to clean cooking fuels and technologies. And we're really striving to close the gap for those people in the next 13 years, so by 2030. So one of the things that we really feel is important is that as countries focus on closing that gap in the next 13 years, that it's really critical that they put access considerations at the heart of their energy policy. So, 70% of Africa's least electrified nations, many of them have access rates below 20% of their population, have barely begun establishing a policy and regulatory environment that would support this kind of transformation. And the sort of things that, we would be hoping that they would move forward is that electrification plans would start to define some of the boundaries between those efforts to build out the grid through utilities in urban centres and those that allow the flourishing of decentralized solutions in more rural communities. And today we see about 44% of countries don't have electrification plans like that. But if we look to regions of the world like the Asia Pacific, where you have much more favorable policy and regulatory frameworks, you do actually see that translating into the same kind of results in terms of the access numbers. So the first thing we feel that it's really important in the context of access is to think about putting those issues at the center of the energy policy and planning processes. And then, the second thing that it's worth reflecting on is that utilities play a really important role in the developing world. And when we look at the information that we have to hand, particularly in some of those very low access countries, we see that many utilities are just not credit-worthy. And that means that they struggle to make the investments that are necessary to expand electricity networks to those populations that don't have access today. And, so it means that we don't see dedicated budget lines to support electrification. And then we need a lot more improvements in terms of the transparency and monitoring of what, financial and technical performance. So those are two sort of essential things that need to happen in the sector. But coming back to your question about skills and capacity, and particularly trying to tackle this problem for those rural populations that make up a large portion of those without access today, there's a great need to build the capacity for markets to expand, and that means technical skills, so the ability to install standalone solar and mini grid solutions, to maintain them, to operate them, to service them. So having all of that, the the market capacity that allows that market to grow. We also need to work in the finance sector. So we need to work with and build the capacity and awareness of local financial institutions so that they are able to both understand and invest in small scale project opportunities at the local level. And then, I think, at the end of the day, we're all focused on growth and closing this gap as quickly as possible. And there are many civil society organisations and others working at the national level in these countries, and they could play a really critical role in socialising some of the best practices, the way the market is expanding, so that they can be rapidly taken to other places and replicated. So maybe I'll just leave it at that for now.
That's great, Jane. Thanks. There's also been a lot of talk when it comes to capacity, and as we build this transition from an old energy economy to a new energy economy, about creating or involving in a more meaningful way women, especially as it relates not just as end users of renewable energy, but also as it relates to actually helping to create jobs and opportunities in remote rural communities. Can you talk a little bit about what SE for All is doing with regards to women and how you view that as it relates to capacity?
Yep. So we're very focused on the all in our name, so sustainable energy for all, and we want to ensure as we have this large energy transition that women and those that are very remote from the grid and may be vulnerable for other issues such as affordability are included in energy solutions and opportunities. And so we're quite focused in exploring how we can help promote access by women and participation by women in the design and delivery of energy businesses in these decentralized energy solutions like solar home systems, cooking solutions, and many other things. They are among the users of those assets. They can help define what is most useful. They can help us take some of those energy opportunities to customers that are very far from the grid and quite difficult to reach through other means. But it also generates a lot of positive things outside, and having that energy service directly. Things that come through having energy, like income generating opportunities, the ability to run a business, to having more time to study, having lights so that you can study at night, to having improved health and less exposure to violence that comes with collecting fuel wood and other assets to be able to provide those cooking and other energy solutions through other means. And I think just by being an agent within the energy service and delivery and energy businesses, that allows women's position in society and the household to change and gives them a voice in decision making. And for those reasons and many others, SE for All has recently announced that we aim to build a new public-private civil society like-minded partnership to help really accelerate issues on gender equality, social inclusion, and women's empowerment. And the goals that this group partner are interested in advancing is to make sure that the very poorest people who wouldn't be reached through sort of regular business as usual approaches will have access to modern energy, and that women have full participation in those solutions, and that we can strengthen collaboration at the local level so that becomes a reality. And lastly, people we've been talking to are very interested in looking at how to help unlock finance from both public and private sources to support solutions that allow greater equality and social inclusion. So we've been moving since our forum in April, where we announced we were going to sort of work together on this. This June we had a design meeting to really work out a very action-oriented work plan and our working arrangements for the partnership, and we're aiming to have a formal launch in COP23 in November this year in Bonn. And so, if there's anyone in your audience that would be interested to be part of this, we'd encourage them to reach out to us because we'd like to hear from them.
That sounds great, Jane. I'm sure that, well, at least hopefully, you'll get some good response from our listeners. So we talked about different aspects of capacity, but I think maybe overlooked sometimes is also the capacity within major lending organizations like the multilateral development banks, as well as donor countries, and the fact that they also have limitations in their capacity and have been used to doing things in a certain way for a long time, and times have changed. So how does SE for All help to play that catalytic role, which I know you often play in terms of stimulating better coordination, collaboration between those types of organizations and helping bring them along so that they're also part of this transition and able to adjust their abilities as needed?
So at Sustainable Energy for All, we have several different ways with multilateral development banks and donors and other partners that are engaged in delivering access solutions. One way we work is through Sustainable Energy for All's regional hubs. These are hosted at the regional development banks in Latin America and the Caribbean, in the Asia Pacific, and in sub-Saharan Africa. We also have a knowledge hub at the World Bank, and so we work very closely with them, and through them with other regional partners and with focal points within the ministries of energy in countries in each of those regions. And particularly in Africa, there's been a very strong interest in working with these hubs at the country level on developing strategies to meet Sustainable Development Goal 7 for nationally owned strategies, and also to develop investment prospectuses or strategic investment roadmaps to deliver those. And at the moment, we are having a dialogue with our regional hubs on how we can strengthen our support to them with a specific aim to scale and grow markets and unlock finance to ultimately help in closing those access gaps that we've been talking to. The other thing that what's useful about having a direct relationship through our regional hubs is it helps to keep the access agenda at the top of the dialogue and a focus of our dialogue with the MDBs and also with our client countries. And I think this is particularly important as we go forward to make sure that we don't lose track of the fact that we have a significant gap to close in the next 13 years, and this is really going to require all of us to crowd around the delivery to align our internal incentives and thereby help to unlock some of the resources to support country level implementation, and that I think in turn will help to unlock many of the skills that exist within those development banks. Maybe just to make one other comment, one of the ways that Ethical works, we do receive requests, and this is maybe a less public side of our work, to act as a collaborative agent to help facilitate dialogue and assist governments in aligning activities on energy access and sometimes on the nationally determined contributions and the plans that countries have put forward in the context of the Paris Agreement. And the type of requests and support we get asked is to help think through the evidence of what's happening, where we need to get to, where there are things that are working that could be helpful, in highlighting new business models or financial models that could be applied in a different context. And we also get pulled in to help understand how to establish the sort of the goals, the monitoring, evaluation, and learning frameworks that allow us to keep track of progress, so that we can be aware of how far we're getting and make corrections if things are not moving as fast as they should be. And so that's maybe another sort of more less public way in which we work with many of the other actors in this space.
Well, hopefully we can do another one of these a little bit down the line, and you can tell us how that's all progressing, because I'm sure it's, even though it's not public facing as much, it's also a critical piece of work. So excited to hear more down the road.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so switching gears just for a second, just wrapping up. Obviously 600 plus million people in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, have no access to electricity. So for good reason, we focus a lot on Africa. But India also is doing a lot of really interesting work. They're the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gas. They're also a fast emerging leader on climate globally, as well as one of the biggest renewable energy markets in the world. What role do you think decentralized distributed solutions can play in meeting India's future energy needs as well as climate ambitions?
So, India's made really strong progress. If you look at what we know about electrification in India, for example, the latest data shows us that in 2014, 79% of the population was connected to electricity. There's been significant growth in urban zones, and in fact, in urban parts of India, it was as high, access to electricity was as high as 98%, but it lags a little bit in the rural areas, so just around 70% today. The other thing that you see, if you have a look at, the state of the conditions in the policy and regulatory setting that allow investments to be made and those type of actions to happen, we see that in India that they have many of the elements that you would expect to see, in terms of electricity planning and to providing an opening for the extension of grids in urban and peri-urban centres, to the growth in mini grids, and also standalone solar home systems and other opportunities like we were talking about earlier. And this suggests that many of those things are complementary. We see, in India, they've got approved electrification plans. They track how those are being implemented. They have frameworks for mini grids, for grid electrification, standalone systems. They have utility credit worthiness. They're transparent on what utilities do and monitoring their progress. So some of the things that we've been talking about. And we see them, India, emerging as a leader with an innovative mix of grid and off-grid solutions. So, I think the opportunity that we have is to engage with India and to really understand what they've been doing, what's working, where it's working, and what are the conditions that have made that work well. And then if we can tap their experience, we can help maybe through organizations like Power for All or Sustainable Energy for All and others in the field, help to transfer that experience to sub-Saharan Africa and other countries that face similar challenges but maybe not working as fast. And on the decentralized energy solutions, India could potentially play a critical role in showing that, improving the viability and role of mini grids as a means to deliver access. We see that they have quite a few programs up and running to support this, and it will be interesting to track how these things go. So the Ministry of New and Renewable Resources in India has set a goal to roll out 10,000 mini and microgrids with a combined capacity of 500 megawatts or more by 2021, which is a fairly significant commitment. We see organizations like Rockefeller Foundation with their Smart Power for Rural Development Program is looking at micro-enterprise opportunities and what businesses might ensue from having access to power through mini or microgrids. So this is an important thing, the productive use of that energy resource. And then we also see businesses like Simper, like ONC, they're working on pay-go TVs and small-scale renewable power plants. They're innovating a lot in the space. So I think that the big opportunity for us is to have a look at these initiatives, how they grow, how they're evolving, and see how we can tap this experience as quick as we can and transfer it to other parts of Asia and Africa, so everybody can move forward at a greater pace and scale. And I think, calling on you, William, maybe you and I could do something to communicate some of that as things evolve.
Well, I definitely would look forward to that. Great, Jane. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know it was a little bit difficult scheduling it but we're very grateful and look forward to working with you and SE for All more closely in the future.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.